Colleagues, good afternoon. We are continuing our conference, and now I will hand over the floor. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Anastasia Yelfimova, Director of the Consulting Practice. And now we continue with our next speaker. This is Evgeny Selyev from MR Group, Deputy Director for Digital Technologies. Evgeny, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, Anastasia. Well, let me get straight to the point. Briefly about MR Group. Over 20 years on the market, more than 50 projects in the portfolio, over 11 million square meters delivered, 13-time Developer of the Year, and ranked in the top 3 by RBC and Forbes. We have come a very long way together with IBIM in terms of implementing BIM technologies in our processes. Here, a wonderful timeline is presented. In 2016, we started with simple models and our first BIM projects. Naturally, our main focus was on clash detection, trying to calculate SMR, attempting to determine the LOF factor, and so on and so forth. In 2019, we switched to a new work format and abandoned IFC. Probably the most significant things here were that we started to get more involved in the production technology during design, how our designer develops our future models. And in particular, for example, the white box family library, which I will talk about in more detail a bit later. In 2023, we went through this interesting stage where new realities emerged. Import substitution became a very important issue, and we migrated services with about 3,000 users from one solution to another. We also gained, so to speak, unique experience. And by 2025, I would probably say that our culture of using BIM had encompassed almost all processes in the company. Right now, there are a lot of interesting cases from layouts for CRM or layouts for the website to calculating apartment plans, cross-checking with the apartment planning assignment, as well as aspects related to construction and installation work. But we'll look at all of this as we go through the presentation. So let's get into some details, shall we? For example, improving the quality of layout solutions. The BIM company, commissioned by MR, developed a white box family library that contains the main parameters important to us in these families. For example, the service area. It's a very important factor to check whether the layout we are offering our customers is actually functional and whether it will be pleasant and comfortable to live in. But there are also some advantages for us as well. For example, it's possible to embed water outlets, electrical equipment, and other elements directly into the family and get a more accurate estimate for the finishing stage. As is well known, finishing is quite an expensive process. If you do it, so to speak, close to the final stage, the cost is almost comparable to major construction and installation work. The next slide talks about unified workspace, but this is already a de facto standard in the industry. Still, it's worth mentioning that for us, Cirex has become such a workspace at this point, and it really helped us a lot in the transition in organizing this work, setting up workflows, approvals, and overall support, as well as, in fact, supporting and developing this system and implementing it within the company. In particular, we like this approach so much that it has now gone beyond just design. We can even carry out product-related approvals in Cirex, for example, when we need to survey a certain number of people, even within our own company. And often it's convenient to do this in a unified data environment. The next slide is about increasing the speed of calculating volumes and loss factors. This is really an endless topic that one could talk about for a very long time. Also, in principle, it is now becoming an industry standard to use some internal classifiers when it comes to defining construction information. Somehow it needs to be classified and normalized so that it can be used later in the company's business processes. And accordingly, we have come a long way from simply matching elements to some catalog to developing automated methods for determining what a particular volume refers to and creating classifiers, including for the designer, which makes this process easier for us. Accordingly, calculating the loss factor has always been a rather important aspect for us, as it shows how efficiently we are using our space. And all of this we implement using BIM. One of the relatively new areas for us is monitoring the current status of construction project implementation. Well, how new is it really? This has been going on for about 3 years. And this is actually something I'm quite actively involved in right now. It's one of my main tasks, so to speak, monitoring the current status of construction project implementation. A lot of work has been done here as well, including research efforts. By mutual agreement, in partnership, so to speak, with companies that carry out construction supervision, we agreed that we would maintain construction models. What does a construction model actually represent? Well, in reality, it's simply a copy of the current working model stored in the data center, into which additional information is entered about the completion of each element, the date, the contractor, the relationship, and the work classifier. After that, this information in the element can be automatically aggregated in some way and then transferred to our corporate database, from which this information can accordingly be used by other company services. The green part shows what has currently been completed, while the gray part in the lower image or the blue part in the upper image represents what is generally planned to be completed. It's quite visual. It's a very convenient format for project meetings, allowing you to quickly assess the scale of construction and the contractor's progress on this work. Similarly, for us, the quality of execution is also a very important issue in this area. Therefore, just as we created a common data environment for the designer and the contractor, we also have a system that allows us to exchange information about construction quality technical supervision in real time. Each of our projects is represented there. Every construction supervisor, every general contractor, and every subcontractor working on our projects is connected to this system. Accordingly, all documentation and administrative activities related to managing comments and observations are carried out there. For our part, we are deeply integrated with these services, and accordingly, we can see in real time the reports on how proactively, so to speak, our colleagues are addressing the comments, what their status is, how many have been resolved, and how many were issued during the reporting period. Overall, it's a fairly classic setup, but still a very important one. All these mechanisms that we've been discussing, given that MR has this particular feature due to its scale, as we've already mentioned, with more than 50 projects in the portfolio, they naturally need to be formalized in some way because companies change, some come, others leave. That's not really important. In general, companies change and contractors change even more often. Roughly speaking, there are a lot of employees, as I mentioned. For example, our SAREC system currently has more than 3,000 users connected. All of them need to be trained in some way. They all need clear instructions on how to operate within our systems, how to interact with us so that it's beneficial for everyone. That's why, naturally, the company develops standards and regulations with the support of IBIM, of course. And basically, at the moment, I would say there are three key standards. The information modeling standard, which essentially describes the foundation on which further collaboration will be built. This is the information model created by the designer, so to speak. It serves as a single source of information about construction elements. That's it. It describes in quite some detail, including, as I mentioned, delving a bit into the design process itself, how our model should be created. I think we provide fairly confident support to the designer along this path. We also have a library of families, which we've mentioned, as well as approaches and technologies that we consider very effective in design. And we've included those in the standard as well. And naturally, it also lays the foundation for all the subsequent services we will use, such as reports on construction models. The next important regulation for us concerns the procedures for construction supervision. The next important regulation for us is the regulation governing construction supervision procedures. As I already mentioned in part, it describes how to work within the system, how to handle comments, and how to work with construction models. And of course, it's not just BIM has its limitations. So naturally, there is also a section covering those classic non-modeled volumes or other administrative and operational activities. The construction supervision that takes place on site is also described in this regulation. So it's a comprehensive document that overall makes it quite easy to integrate into our projects, our approaches, and the reality we would like to exist in. That's it. That's more or less everything regarding the regulations. What is it that we fundamentally want to see in our projects? what is our approach, our methodology when building these services that we are looking at now? We would like every one of our requirements to go through the BIM model. For us, the BIM model is not so much about the model itself, In general, the story of design is quite interesting, in my opinion. I'm a designer myself, and when I was just starting out, it was a rather complicated thing for my drawings. Some lines, it's all not very accessible to someone who isn't initiated. And for me, so to speak, my position in life or my life's mission has always been to try to extract this information and present it in an accessible way to everyone, essentially to people without a design background, without the ability to read drawings. The BIM model turned out to be exactly that solution. It's the ability to automatically read information in digital format and somehow transform its display so that even people who aren't specialists can view it, or to highlight certain aspects, consolidate information, emphasize or hide something as needed. That's why we come to the concept that our requirements must first and foremost be reflected in the BIM model, after which the implementation of this requirement via this corporate data bus will be transferred to the system that highlights this information. People who are responsible for making decisions with this information will be able to review it regardless of whether they can read drawings or not, and then accordingly they can respond to this information in some way by making a particular decision, a management decision. That's basically how it works. That's the key concept here. As an example of what I'm talking about regarding management decisions and these systems, the pinnacle of what we currently do with the BIM model is the monthly project reporting. Some of the slides from these reports are shown on the screen. Here, as I mentioned earlier, is a compilation of everything we've seen before. For example, in the upper left corner, we have a display of construction progress in the form of a BIM model. Accordingly, with color coding, you can click on each element and see when exactly it was completed, by which contractor, and how successfully or unsuccessfully it was done. There are also other color indicators that show if there are any comments or issues related to an element and so on. On the right side of this screen, there are two cards displayed. This is another form of reporting with pieces of it compiled into this monthly report. Here we see the progress by month in the form of case documents. And here we also see the completed volumes presented for this type of work. In this case, we're talking about structural solutions. And in the background, the most interesting part is the project curve, which actually consists of 4 lines. Well, the green one, which is quite standard, is the DGP line. This shows how the work was supposed to be performed, expressed in monetary terms, according to the contract we made with the contractor, broken down by month. The next line, I probably can't tell what color it is right now, but that's not important. There's a line that represents the KS documents, and this simply shows the work that has already been recorded by our accountants, including those that are still pending approval. But what I personally don't really like about this line is that it lags a bit behind the actual progress of the project while construction supervision confirms the work, while this general statement is compiled and then it's handed over to MR. And MR also doesn't process it very quickly in their own systems. It's not a matter of 1 or 2 days. It can take some time. And as for payment, that's a whole other story because there's the payment window and so on and so forth. But in terms of information, this line is definitely present here. And it also shows how successfully we are implementing this project financially. And the 2 lines where one flows into the other are the most interesting. These are, in fact, the lines built on the basis of the project schedule. Each of our project schedules, in addition to its standard features like having tasks, dependencies between them, and certain durations, also includes a resource component. That is, each task is assigned a resource according to the quantity we obtain from the BIM model. Accordingly, this resource in most cases is distributed fairly linearly over the duration. In this way, it determines for us the contractor's productivity required to achieve the desired result. And accordingly, our system for working with the CSP allows us to mark a certain completion date for this very resource. As I mentioned, construction supervision prepares a construction model for us that contains this information. And Accordingly, we have a clear understanding of the contractor's actual progress. For our portfolio, for our scale, we chose a 1 week interval. Yes, so once a week we collect BIM models and accordingly absorb this information about how far our construction has progressed. Accordingly, the KSP tools automatically recalculate the task forecasts for us based on the actual output. And so at a certain point, when we look at the reports, the actual performance line transitions into the forecast performance line. This way, we can understand how we are doing in terms of deadlines, how far we are from the DGP, how close we are to the DGP, and most importantly, what we need to do to meet our required deadlines, where we need to speed up or slow down, although, of course, that rarely happens. In general, what compensatory measures we need to plan for in this situation.
Listen, can I ask a question as we go? I think I missed this point, probably from watching MR over the past many years. Who's the planner now? Whose side are you on? What level of detail does the schedule have specifically on the planning side? The actual part is clear, but the planning model, what does the schedule look like? Is it big at all?
Well, that's certainly an interesting question. Given the scale again, coming back to the scale and the practical realities of MR and our rather, let's say, Spartan and highly efficient approach to staffing is, we do try not to hire employees who don't directly and significantly impact our business. So the schedule itself is quite concise and streamlined. That's the word I was looking for. Yes, it's consolidated. So probably the construction and installation work block contains roughly 200 items. But these items are multiplied across the construction sites, meaning across building sections and so on and so forth. By itself, the set of tasks for construction and installation work, as listed in the classifier for such work, is just 200 items. At the same time, there are some not so obvious divisions, like the structure of the underground part, the structure of the first floor, the structure of the above ground part specifically to accommodate the construction schedule so that, for example, you can link the start of facade work to the completion of these tasks. Yes, once the first floor is finished, you can start on the facades because the facades of the first floor are usually installed a bit later and there are still some deliveries going on there. So in general, these are the kinds of nuances that this classifier also supports. So accordingly, when planning, we create this schedule based on the classifier using data from the BIM model and then sign it with our general contractor. That's it. At the same time, despite its simplicity over almost 3 years of use, this structure has proven to be very effective because it's easy enough to manage, yet it clearly signals any issues that arise during construction. In fact, as a major developer, it's not particularly important to me which specific section is lagging behind, say, in terms of concrete work, or that these exact 3 columns haven't been completed. What matters to me is the pace. I understand that sometimes my general contractors needs force them to shift the work front from one area to another. And this level of abstraction basically allows me not to bother either the general contractor or myself with these issues. And if something does fall behind the way I see it, the overall pace of the project should remain sufficiently high. All right. I think that's the end of our presentation.
The last slide. Zhenya, could you please tell us, considering that MR Group, if you look at the timeline, has been working with BIM technologies for quite a long time and in general is different from MR Pragmatica, meaning they proceed calmly, gradually, step by step. That is, they didn't immediately implement everything, the full cycle of BIM technology use, digitalization, rushing ahead. Instead, they move forward step by step. What became the key trigger here? Was it that all the information contained in the model was consolidated specifically in the form of such reporting? So it turns out that you and your team were working on bringing all of this together into a single dashboard.
Okay. The question is clear, but honestly, I have a very subjective opinion about this because it seems to me that the construction information classifier is to blame for everything. When we joined MR, we found that there was a rather fragmented approach to creating things like the DGP, the schedule plan, and so on. Basically, the first thing we started with was developing the construction information classifier. And it actually took us almost a year, partly because creating a classifier is not just about developing it. There's also all the administrative work involved in integrating it into regulations, standard contract templates, and standard budget forms.
So basically it had to satisfy everyone, since everyone has their own needs.
That's also a debatable issue because in principle, no solution can satisfy everyone. So yes, we tried to find some kind of middle ground among all the opinions. Moreover, we had specific objectives for this classifier and we developed it based on those. Of course, we also took into account the realities and the feedback we received about it. But overall, we built it for specific per-pestle normalized information, to connect the information present in the BIM model, to link it with the project schedule, to link it with the budget, to link it with what else? What else? I guess that's all, yes. Primarily with the project schedule and the budget. So this is what actually allowed us, in fact, to ultimately achieve the kind of reporting we currently have for our project.
If I may, I'd like to make more of a comment than a question regarding MR Group, regarding their approach. I've had this multi-year track of interacting with various teams. In fact, with different teams I've had the chance to work with at MR Group. And here we are talking about the pragmatism of MR Group, about how the team is always looking for what can truly impact the business. If there's a certain technology, let's find out what can actually affect the business and focus on that specifically. Let's not try to solve every possible problem all at once. BIM taking over the entire universe, conquering the galaxy, that's probably not the story here. Right. And the second point, as I was sitting here, I caught myself thinking about how I was recently in China, and when they were carrying out reforms, everyone there really admires their reform leader, Deng Xiaoping, and he always said that China's reforms are a process like crossing a mountain river. You can't see the stones, you have to carefully feel for them with your foot and only then take the next step. And I realized that, in fact, MR Group's approach to BIM was just like feeling your way across a mountain river with your feet. In other words, you carefully put your foot down. If it doesn't wobble, you move on. If it does, you try another spot. But the most important thing in this process is persistence, because over the years, the process has changed dramatically. In fact, the level of culture and the way we interact with the BIM model have changed significantly. So over these years, there really has been progress. And it was achieved through these gradual, careful steps, feeling your way forward and not trying to rack your brain with some mega tasks, right? And how do you feel about it yourself? Are you still moving forward in the same way, or do you ever feel like, let's just tear everything all down and build something completely new?
Well, I prefer a simpler way of putting it. Going fast actually means making small steps, but every day, that's it. And yes, really, I'll repeat myself. Nastya asked a question about how difficult it was to get it approved and so on. Indeed, the scale, let's say, inevitably teaches you that every step has to be cautious and gradual. First and foremost, you also have to sell every decision to yourself internally. This leaves a certain marking that it's not always possible to turn everything upside down in just 3 minutes. Sometimes life forces you to make a drastic change, like it was with Sodoma. But that's okay too. It seems we've shown enough flexibility as a company in that regard. When decisive action is needed, we take it. But really, it's true, there is this issue that with all our know-how, all the new opportunities that BIM provides, or any technology for that matter, the first thing needed is for the user to get used to it, right? And accordingly, there's no point in implementing amazing artificial intelligence for generating some kind of stories. For example, yes, please don't get hung up on artificial intelligence here. If no one is going to use them, if I'm just the creator thinking, oh, what a lovely little flower I've made, but no one is interested in it. That's why, of course, we always start from the needs of our employees, our colleagues, and little by little, gradually expanding their horizons about how BIM can be used. We introduce these things.
I have another question. May I? Yes. So as we saw from the previous presentation, there was also this interesting idea that at the current moment in time, the winner is essentially the one who not only has the right product, but also possesses the right management system and is able to effectively utilize both. And by right, you can mean anything you want. And in this case, probably the question is, when it comes to using digital attributed information models, BIM models, what is more important for you to integrate right now? I can see from your slides that you are doing both. That is, what are you integrating into the product? In other words, the BIM model somehow affects the quality of the product and also affects the quality of the management system. So actually, the the slide that's still on the screen, how do you feel the priorities are being set right now? What is more important to you at this moment? Is it more about management, margin, and construction management efficiency, or about the quality of the product, specifically BIM, of course?
Well, again, I can only give a subjective answer to this because I myself am from the strategy department. We're more focused on management. So our interaction with the product is rather limited. Although we do have projects where we're involved as well, for example, with checklists and other aspects during product implementation. So I can only speak for management. And for me, one of the most important tracks is the development of the management reporting system. Because as I mentioned, this kind of inaccessible knowledge, the whole technology of design in general has always seemed very strange to me. Well, I'm still partly with one foot in the world of programming where it's customary to document every step, every iteration. Everything is publicly accessible and the direction of development is generally clear. But on the other hand, I observe this wonderful world of design where we start here and in 6 months, we'll have some volume that will be approved. And for all those 6 months, you exist in a kind of blissful, happy ignorance about what's actually happening in your project, whether your technical specifications were understood correctly, whether we're moving in the right direction or not. And now, thanks to BIM, for us, this is a very significant, major qualitative leap from this event-based system to a regular one. Once a week, we review the status of the design, the status of the construction, and so on and so forth. We no longer find ourselves in those periods of oblivion when we could only hope that we would get the result we were counting on. For me, this is truly a catharsis in the approach to management, specifically in development. This ability to transparently monitor the progress of your contractors, whether it's design, construction, or anything else, almost in real time.
For me, it becomes a daily or weekly regular habit of analysis. It's essentially a kind of regular management, meaning that in this context, BIM serves as a tool for transferring and promoting regular management.
Exactly. In fact, the effect is really, well, in my opinion, again, this is my subjective assessment. I can't really express it in terms of money or construction timelines, but to some extent, I'm more of a support role in this whole story. But still, I see quite a noticeable effect from the fact that we even during our own project meetings, for example, where one of the speakers is from the strategy directorate, we actually use our presentations to introduce new features as well. And when we started reviewing the construction model report on a weekly basis, the situation improved significantly well. I can't say it became qualitatively better. In many aspects, we made progress, but it became qualitatively clearer. There were more consumers of this information. The project team became more interested in what was happening there. Before that, they simply didn't even have such a way to monitor things. And now they've experienced it and they manage their projects a bit differently. And for me, this is a very important thing.
Well, I think for business, this should always be a very important thing, especially if we're talking about such a serious business, then transparency. Not even in the usual sense where transparency means that something is being stolen and now we've caught it, but here we actually saw it. But transparency specifically is about having all the necessary information to make decisions here and now. I think that's a key indicator of the maturity of company's management system, of project management systems as a whole. And if you manage to achieve that, to access this information for decision making here and now, in the right place at the right time, I think that's truly a wonderful result.
When I promote this idea within the company, I don't even use here and now. I emphasize that it's much earlier than what you're used to. Much earlier than in traditional design approaches. It often seems to you, and we frequently encounter this situation when we're jointly involved in projects for calculating volumes. We come to the project team and say, colleagues, you have some scheduled activity coming up. For example, our company has a quarterly schedule update as a standard practice. We come and say that we would like to clarify the volumes. In about a month and a half, you'll be starting the engineering phase, for example, and we want to calculate it. Please provide us with the model together with the designers. And often I encounter people who simply don't understand how is that possible. We haven't released the working documentation yet. We shouldn't have this information in theory. Nothing has been approved, but we understand that obviously at this point in time, the designer was working, passing on assignments, developing their systems, somehow adapting the design development stage during the process. And accordingly, all this information actually already exists. That's it. Every time it's like an eye-opening moment, realizing that this information is already there. We show them, look, your designer has done a great job. They've already put so much effort into the model. And the only thing holding you back is that they haven't generated a PDF for you yet. In reality, this information has been available to you for a long time already, not just for the month and a half since we arrived, but it's been there for 3 months and you didn't even know about it.
I have a question, probably the last one given the timing, but it's quite a personal one. This one is specifically for you. Given that you have quite a unique background, you've managed to work at several developers before MR and also at a design firm, plus you're well versed in IT. So how does the MR group's approach differ from what you've seen elsewhere? That's probably the first part of the question. The second part, based on this experience, did it help you somehow convey the value of using information from the model to the business? And the third, final part of the question, what advice would you give?
Hold on, like a goldfish, I'm going to forget already. 3 questions is too many. All right. Well, let's start with the first one. First of all, it seems to me that, again, this is a very subjective matter. For one thing, I don't have that much varied experience. I've always worked in companies that build fairly high-end housing, and regardless of the number of projects, each one is still a kind of boutique story. So to some extent, I can never really say that I have experience with typical construction or anything like that, where it would seem that BIM would be much more effective. So every time it's this process of breaking the stereotype that BIM can be used on a unique project and it works every time, which is great. That's it. But on a broader scale, if you ask for my personal opinion, not even as a professional, but more as an individual when it comes to working with digital technologies and construction, the key difference between development companies is how they approach construction, whether they want to take on some general contracting functions themselves or not at all, right? Basically, do they order a turnkey building or do they get involved with the nuances and details of construction, taking on a coordinating role themselves? That's it. And accordingly, I've seen both approaches and in different companies. This is the key difference that either significantly limits or changes your work. That's it. Overall, I can't really identify any other major differences. What was the second question?
Probably given the timing, straight to the third.
Third?
About advice. Right now, well, obviously, it's a bit difficult for us to predict the market situation at all. And very often developers face the reality that, sorry, but digitalization and BIM technologies are not a priority. We just need to build and sell. Right.
Well,
but you went ahead and you continue to move forward quite purposefully.
In fact, it seems to me, considering everything, that this whole dialogue about the need for digitalization, the need to solve business issues in general, is very much shrouded in certain stereotypes. In these kinds of stories, I don't know, maybe even a sort of cinematic perception, if you will, about how digitalization happens, some kind of mega nanorobots, some very high level expensive managers come in and make decisions, IT guys with smoothies on scooters. But in reality, digitalization is more about work culture, about work discipline. I would probably advise, first of all, to always look at what benefit you can actually bring to the business, so to speak, and to really focus yourself on achieving exactly that goal. Some of the things we do in MR are so basic that simply using a standard Excel format with a fixed Excel template for exchanging information between participants solves a huge number of business problems. And as you can imagine, this kind of digitalization, in quotes, biointegration, as I call it, doesn't require any money at all. But the positive effect, especially in finance, is very clear, and it's hard to overestimate it. At the same time, the resources that are freed up, well, I usually propose a kind of deal to the business, if you will. We free up something through these automations. These freed up resources, including a certain percentage of them, are then allocated to further automation, because obviously the more resources you have, the cooler things you can do.
Win-win.
Yes.
Evgeny, thank you very much for coming and for sharing your insights.
You're always welcome. I was glad to take part.
Our time is up, so I have a lot of insights, actually, even though I've been working with the company for quite a while. What impresses me the most is really this process. The fact that it's a process of continuous improvement. I think you could hang up the Toyota way here and after. Have a great day. Thank you very much, Evgeny.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.